Hi there, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church Stony Stratford, and today we're continuing our series of short talks in the Gospel of Luke. And today we come to Luke chapter 16, verses 10 to 18. Jesus continues to teach the disciples about valuing what God has given. And he's talking very much about standards in doing that. Some years ago, my wife Tracy did a computer course, and as she did each module, she took an exam. But the exam required, I think it was about 92% as a pass mark. If you got 91, you failed. 92, all right. 94, 95, even better. The point was, the standard was to be high. And Jesus now teaches this to his disciples. He gives the picture of someone who's a servant, and if he's trusted with little, he can be trusted with much. If he's dishonest with little, he's likely to be dishonest over much as well. In the end, trust is on how we handle even the smallest of tasks. And Jesus basically says this, verse 12, and if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? There's a phrase, that much can be given when people perform well. One expects that. Jesus goes on to point out, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. What does he mean by that? Is money a bad thing? No, not at all. It can be actually a gift of God, but it's how we use it. You see, the trouble is, what's very much seeped into our consciences and the culture is the actual take on money, which comes from the song Money on Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. Money is the root of all evil, so they say. No, the Bible doesn't say it's the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6 verse 10, it's the love of money. What Jesus is saying here, don't make money your God. Rather, worship the Creator, God himself, rather than the created. Now at this moment, the Pharisees seem to be on the edge of everything. They were very respected, and the people would have looked up to them. But they also liked their sort of position in society, and it says that they actually sneered. They were sort of vocal in their disagreement about this. But Jesus has a shock for them. He says to this, he said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valid among men is detestable in God's sight. They were rather banking on the praise of man. Jesus says that doesn't really count for much. And now Jesus really goes for the jugular by using an example they would have agreed with and then showing how they fail with that example. Jesus points out that the law and the prophets were proclaimed until John the Baptist. It talks about the good news of the kingdom is being preached. It talks this rather odd phrase of everyone forcing their way into it. What does that mean? People are attracted to it? People are trying to oppose it? Well, that would almost be a sermon in itself. But the key thing is he makes the point here that it is easier for heaven, this verse 17, and earth to disappear than for the least stroke of the pen to drop out the law. The phrase that's often used in the Old English was jot and tittle. It means full stop and comma. He says God's law continues. Now, there's a sense in which Jesus has fulfilled much of the law. But now Jesus hits them with a big one, part of the moral law, which still remains. Verse 18, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. and a man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. What does he mean by this? Why does he use this particular law? Well, I'll tell you why. The Pharisees would have been nodding in agreement with Jesus' assessment of the law. But they would have been divided over this law. They had many different views on it, and they couldn't really agree amongst themselves on it. So Jesus says, well, look at it. You can't all be right. Here's a failure of your observance of the law. And in that failure, we see why you're so obsessed with the good view of man rather than following God's law. What was Jesus' take on divorce? Well, it's quite interesting. We can see it in Matthew 19, verse 8 and 9. Jesus, when answering a question, says this: Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because of your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery. Now, the Pharisees had all kinds of laws, some chauvinistic. A man could literally divorce his wife if he thought she was losing her looks, or she burnt the dinner, or something like that. And Jesus says, no, God's standards are way higher than yours. That's how it works. But let's go back to Jesus' relationship with the law, because this is interesting. Earlier in Matthew's Gospel, we read this. Matthew 5, verse 17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Now, by that, he means everything within the law. What does he mean? Well, it means he keeps the law. He keeps every aspect of the law. And actually, all those strange laws about sacrifice, he kept them when he was put to death on the cross. How does the Bible treat that? Well, it treats it in a unique way. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 21. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Just as the sacrifice was a substitute for sin, so Jesus has become a substitute for our sin. And we can claim him as our substitute if we ask to be forgiven. Thank you so much for listening.